Confused about how to plan for your retirement? Shawn Maloney is here to help. Shawn has created the Retire Happy framework that considers more than just how much you should save. Getting information and tools to preserve your financial future is minutes away. Welcome to the Priority of Retirement with your host, Shawn Maloney.
Welcome to another episode of the Priority of Retirement, where we delve into all the aspects of retirement planning for a happy retirement. I'm your host, Shawn Maloney, and today we have a very special guest who brings over 3 decades of experience in stewardship and generosity within a ministry context. Shane Whybrew is the vice president of take two. Gonna do that one again. All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to another episode of the Priority of Retirement, where we dive into all aspects of retirement planning for a happy retirement. I'm your host, Shawn Maloney, and today we have a very special guest who brings over 3 decades of experience in stewardship and generosity within a ministry context. Shane Whybrew is a vice president of the Financial Wisdom Network at the Ron Blue Institute, an organization dedicated to teaching biblical wisdom. Shane's journey has been seeing him serve as a fundraiser, consultant, and pastor, all with a focus on helping others understand and apply what the Bible has to say about money and possessions. So join us as we dive into the 4-H tools and others of financial decision-making and use these valuable insights that Shane has to offer for us. So Shane, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Shawn. Thank you.
It's an honor. I've been following the Ron Blue Institute for a long time. Love the material. So I'm excited to dive in and share it with our listeners here today. It's great stuff. Great stuff. So, the first thing, can you just share a little bit about your journey, what led you to become Vice President of the Financial Wisdom Network? And really, what is the Financial Wisdom Network at the Ron Blue Institute?
Sure. Well, having been in professional Christian fundraising over 30 years, probably 6 or 7 years ago, I landed on staff at a large multi-site mega church on the north side of Indianapolis. And as its first ever stewardship pastor. And so the moment I started serving with Grace Church in Noblesville, I ran to the Ron Blue Institute, knowing what resources that God has given the Institute over a number of years, and talked with them about piloting or pioneering and attempting to use some of the principles that Ron has taught and spoken about for years in the context of our church. And that it got fun in a hurry, and we began to develop a really fun relationship while I was on staff at Grace Church and with content and curriculum from the Ron Blue Institute. My journey to serving on staff with the Institute came years later, but it probably is summarized or illustrated by Ron Blue speaking at a very big church in South Florida, probably 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
And Ron was making one of the big, bold statements that Ron Blue makes often when he speaks. And he said that the Bible speaks authoritatively to any financial decision anyone could make at all times at any income level. Combine that with the other statement that the Bible has more to say about money and possessions than any other singular topic. And the pastor of this church approached Ron after he spoke. And he said, Ron, if what you said tonight is true, why isn't the church perceived as a center of financial wisdom?
Mm-hmm.
And that singular question has really stuck and bothered Ron for a number of years, because you and I and most people don't think to run or race to our church for answers about what to do with what God's entrusted with us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's, and I know from obviously, and we, for me, the church I go to, we use some of the Ron Blue Institute materials for teaching small groups at our churches to be good financial stewards and being good stewards in general, right? Our time, treasures, and talents. And like you said, I mean, the Bible has over 2,000 references of things about stewardship, financial and otherwise. And we rely on the Bible for so many things in our life to direct us. Often we get asked the question in that class is like, why would the Bible have so many references to finances and stewardship? And, of course, and, this is like, well, it's because it's on our minds as humans all the time. It's in our face. And even back 2,000 years ago, it was the same thing. And it still applies today that Jesus knew that it was going to be something that affects our life in a deep way. It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, for those people that aren't as familiar with the Ron Blue Institute, kind of tell a little bit about what the mission of the Ron Blue Institute is and how it helps individuals and families with biblical financial wisdom.
Sure. The Ron Blue Institute primarily operates in three different spheres or circles of influence. And the first sphere or circle of influence that it operates in is with financial advisors. We have a very close relationship with Kingdom Advisors, and we partner with KA to be able to resource men and women who serve in the financial industry in a variety of different contexts, to be able to resource and support them in their client relationships so that they can take biblical financial wisdom and go deep into those relationships with those people that they get to serve. So one sphere of influence that we have is with the financial industry. The second sphere of influence is in the world of academia, in colleges, universities, and Christian high schools. For about a dozen years, the Ron Blue Institute has been developing relationships with colleges and universities to be able to teach principles of biblical financial wisdom to students in those schools. So today we have 3 or 4 Ron Blue Institute centers across the United States on college campuses, with about another dozen affiliate relationships with colleges and universities, and a textbook called Biblical Personal Finance that RBI helped write is being taught in over 60 colleges and universities across the United States. So the world of academia and preparing the next generation of leaders, whether they go into the business world, maybe as financial advisors, and having the option to take biblical personal finance in college is a big deal. Yeah. We partner with the Association of Christian Schools International to as our main distribution partner for that content in Christian high schools, actually all over the United States and around the world. So the world of academia is that second sphere of influence where RBI gets to serve. The third sphere of influence would be the church, in helping churches to rethink and change and transform the way they think and act and communicate about money and possessions through a biblically wise worldview.
Awesome. So much needed, and you mentioned the academia side, and it's so drastically needed because nowadays, back years ago, primary schools and whatnot used to teach, personal finance things in schools, and they don't really do that anymore. And so people, and I think it's critical for people that are college age are getting ready to go out into the real world, and they need to know how to handle some of these things that are going to be thrown at them from a financial side, standpoint, because finances can cause so much stress in people's lives. And what a better place than turn to biblical principles on how to wade your way through that. So I love that the Institute does that. I also obviously love the aspect of the church outreach and people are already there for enrichment and guidance. What a great opportunity to put that in the mix. That's such fantastic. So fantastic. So the 4-H tool, I love this. It's actually, I reference it in my book, The Priority of Retirement, that Ron the Blue Institute has put out. the four H's of financial wisdom. Speak about those four H's and that tool and how it's used. And by the way, folks, in the show notes, you'll be able to find a link to this, to the Ron Blue Institute and this document in the show notes as well.
That's great, Shawn. The four H's of financial wisdom is a rubric or a framework for financial decision making, which kind of it boils down to the concept that all financial behavior follows a belief system. And so often for many of us, we'd like to think that we make financial decisions apart from a belief system, but it's actually not true. So what the 4-H tool is represented to do is to take the way that we can talk about how you and I make financial decisions and align it with our faith. So the 4-H's are heart, health, habits, and hope. And in each quadrant of this financial decision-making tool, there would be scripture that supports and reinforces biblical wisdom in each of those 4-H's.
Love that. Love it. Love it. I mean, you talk about the beliefs and the principles there. And when you look at people's decision making in life, a lot of times it's not necessarily always logic, it's emotions, when people are making decisions. And if you're making decisions off of emotion, we all know that there's two different train of thoughts of emotion here in some of the influences there. You either have Jesus talking in your ear, or you have the adversary talking in your ear and making some of these decisions, right? And I always encourage, everybody to pause for a minute before you make those decisions, especially emotional ones, and then especially ones that are tied to finances and those big decisions. And if you take those decisions back into your core beliefs that this lays out, what a fantastic tool. I mean, I love it. It's such a powerful tool. And we're so happy to share that with everybody. I'm glad you guys put that out there.
Thank you.
Perfect. So you mentioned about piloting this experience with a couple of different churches around the United States. Talk a little bit about what that pilot experience is, what you're doing with those churches.
Sure. We are in discovery and pilot mode with 8 large churches across the United States, where we are looking at what they've done in terms of the topic of money and possessions in their church historically, what gaps they might have in the use of tools or content or curriculum to roll out an entire holistic financial discipleship ministry. And then conversely, if we discover what those gaps or holes are, we're either then working collaboratively with those churches to develop that content, or on our own at the Ron Blue Institute, working very hard to develop new curriculum and new content that would have application in those churches. And so one of the things, Shawn, that we're learning is that historically, really good churches in the United States would check a box or say that they talk about money and possessions well. And what they mean is they do it in one of 2 ways. So your church and mine, only the good churches in the United States, historically relegate this topic of money and possessions to either a product, a singular product, and most often the product that a lot of churches use in this space is from Ramsey Solutions. It's Financial Peace University, and it's served a lot of churches well. The other, but if you boil that down, ultimately that serves one niche or one aspect or demographic of a congregation, maybe those who are struggling and barely surviving in their finances, right, as a practical way to get out of debt 101.
Yep.
The other church in the United States that says, no, we talk about money and possessions and we do it well at our church. And again, I'm only talking about the good churches, yours and mine.
Right.
Are churches that for 4 weeks before their new budget cycle starts, they offer a stewardship series, which generally could be relegated or boiled down into generosity alone. And so churches oftentimes struggle to know where to put this conversation. So our pilot experience with these 8 churches is attempting to bring a framework for financial decision making that would say this financial discipleship needs to live more in a discipleship arena and not a product or a program arena. It needs to be hard baked at every level within the context of every ministry at our churches. And so we're learning and we're testing theories, we're collaborating together and discovering how the church, the Big C church, could reposition the way it's talked about money and possessions.
That's fantastic because, like to your point, a lot of, most pastors have a sermon out there about tithing, and they have, and they have that whole stewardship talk. But to your point, it being intertwined into our whole way of life and our livelihood. And I love the generosity aspect, not just from a tithing standpoint, but generosity in general. Heaven knows that we we need more of that mindset in the world right now. Enabling to intertwine personal finances through the church is powerful in the sense of, we all go to church to be fed, spiritually, and you go there on Sundays, you may go there for a small group and whatnot, but then you go away and we all human nature and we all struggle throughout the week sometimes to keep that, going throughout the week. But if you have things like personal finance that's intertwined into your beliefs that are going throughout, that stuff that we're faced with day in and day out, I think it's another vehicle that enables us to stay attached, right, into the belief system.
Right.
I love that. Really love that. Well, perfect. So tell me a little bit about some key principles of biblical financial wisdom that you believe are crucial for everybody to understand.
Well, ultimately, Ron Blue, if he were on the call with us today, he'd say it's really not that difficult. So one of the H's that we have in the tool is habits. And so ultimately, there's really only 5 principles that having to do with money and money management that we need to pay attention to. A few years ago, Ron Blue was speaking to a Senate subcommittee, and Senator Dodd asked Ron himself, if you could speak to the American family right now, what would you say to them about money and finance? And Ron looked at the senator in the subcommittee and said, well, it's pretty easy. You spend less than you earn, avoid the use of debt, plan for financial margin. In other words, build some margin. You set long-term goals, and he added the last one, which is give generously. And he said, it's really that easy. The senator wrote down each of those 5 principles, looked at Ron and repeated them back to him. And he said, Ron, he said, this is really interesting. He said, that I think that would work at any income level. And Ron said, yes, Senator, even the federal government. And so the principles are not that difficult, but knowing that there are scriptural support and reference for each of those principles, and ultimately starts with the rubric or financial decision that we would all have to make is who owns our stuff. Yeah. One of the small group studies that comes out of the Ron Blue Institute is titled That Most Difficult Question of All, God Owns It All. Right. And so for you and me to have to be forced to answer the decision as believers, who actually owns our stuff, that would be the beginning of financial discipleship. And so really those key 5 principles, along with the belief system for us that God owns it all, would be the beginning of a financial discipleship journey that each of us would go on.
Love it. Love it. Love it. So we always relate to stories. We relate to people's personal side of things and stuff. Can you share a personal story or insight that highlights the importance of applying biblical financial wisdom in everyday life?
Well, Shawn, yeah, that's I'd have many, but one that that always resonates in my heart and in my mind is about 15 years ago. I had a conversation with my wife. Now the conversation was about 10 years in the making, and fraught with a lot of obstacle and hurdles, because the conversation was for us in our family about adoption. God has blessed my wife and me. We've been married almost 28 years with 2 biological girls. And for about a decade of our married life, in the early years, my wife asked about adoption for our family.
Right.
Time and time again, when she asked, I said, you can ask and ask again, but the answer is still no. For me, I was that reluctant husband and father that kind of came to that table of discussion for that topic, kicking and screaming.
Right.
And so as I'd been in fundraising for years and years and years with global organizations, and you can say one too many trips to Africa later, I made the mistake of taking my wife with me to a trip that I led in the Dominican Republic. And it was 2010. 2 weeks after that trip, at dinner in my kitchen at my own home with my wife and 2 girls, Sadie and Lily, my wife said, at the end of the meal, she said, Shane, it's time. And I said, time for what? Dessert? And she said, no, it's time that we revisit the conversation about adoption.
Wow.
And I said, you can ask and you can ask again, but the answer is still no. And the girls, now 10 and 11, they said with one voice, Dad, we've been praying for you. We want a brother. And I said, I don't know who told you prayer is okay, but you better never pray for me, especially about adoption.
Right.
And so now I can tell dinner became this intervention with me at the center of the room. And I thought, with my back against the wall as the spiritual leader of my home, having been in full-time ministry for 17 years already at this point, all of it in stewardship education as a professional Christian fundraiser, with the wealth of experience and knowledge about this topic that God has given me, my back's against the wall. And I said, the best I could come up with, Shawn, at the time was, you know what? I've heard how expensive adoption is, and we can't afford it. End of story. And so my wife ends up saying, like only a spouse could, Shane, you're the one who's been in professional Christian fundraising all these years, raising millions of dollars for nonprofit organizations. Are you going to let a little money stand in the way of what God wants to do in our family?
Wow.
And my heart was pierced, because at that moment, Shawn, the discussion I was in was not about adoption. For me, it was a conversation about my heart and convenience and comfort and satisfaction and and not about what God would ask of me. And so through the context of surrender over those next few weeks, I went unwillingly, begrudgingly to a What is Adoption meeting at an organization that facilitates adoption. And ultimately, we started that process. 2 years after that event, we brought our son home from Ethiopia. And just during that process, I end up employed at a global organization that places children in families around the world, and served in fundraising there 5.5 years. And so what an irony of how God used surrender in my life through the context of the grip that I held on money. And I whenever I'm asked about that, I always go back to that feeling I had.
Yeah, that is a fantastic story. I really appreciate you sharing that. That is fantastic. It reminds me of what we tell people in our small group when we're talking to folks, is that one, like you said, God owns it all, and that's at the center of everything. We're here to be good stewards, right? The other side of it being financially savvy or biblically financially educated and follow biblical principles, it's, are we being good stewards, and what does that mean, right? So are we being good stewards of what we've been given so that we're ready to answer the call that God has for us? If we're not good stewards with our money, and he's not able to use us in the way that he needed us to because we weren't being good stewards, what a more of a motivation. That's such a motivation, I know, for us, our family, to be those good stewards, to be ready for what God has us to call. That's a great example of that. I mean, how powerful is that? That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Shane. I really appreciate you being on today. Guys, if you want to know more about the Ron Blue Institute, you can go to their website, ronblueinstitute.com. There'll be some links on the show notes for this. And a little teaser, we're actually going to have Ron on one of our episodes in the future. So we're excited about that as well. We love the Institute. We love you guys and what you're doing. God bless you guys for the messages and the promotion of what you guys do for biblical financial wisdom. Again, appreciate you having you on today, Shane. And you guys have a fantastic rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Shawn.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to The Priority of Retirement with Shawn Maloney. If you enjoyed the show, check out our reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more free resources to help with your retirement journey, go to retirewisepro.com or check the link in the show notes. You can also download a free copy of Shawn's book, The Priority of Retirement, or reach out to discuss working with him directly at retirewisepro.com. Thanks for listening.
Insurance products offered through the insurance business RetireWise LLC. RetireWise LLC is also an investment advisory practice that offers products and services through AE Wealth Management LLC, AEWM, a registered investment advisor. AEWM does not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by RetireWise LLC are not subject to investment advisor requirements. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the insuring carrier. This podcast intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual situation. RetireWise LLC is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during the show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. The information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by RetireWise LLC. Guests of the Priority of Retirement are not affiliated with, nor do they endorse Shawn Maloney or RetireWise LLC.